This is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp. Let's pause and take a moment to talk about something very important. Life has its pressures for everyone, and we often carry the immense weight of expectation to never show weakness, to hide our true feelings, and believe that asking for support somehow makes us less of a person. But bottling things up isn't the answer. It can often lead to feeling down, burnout, or other unhealthy habits. We want to normalize the idea that it's okay to struggle. Real strength actually comes from opening up about what you are carrying and doing something about it so that you can be at your best for yourself and everyone in your life. If you're feeling the weight of the world, or even if things just feel a bit off, I can't stress enough the value of talking to someone. It could be a friend, a loved one, or a therapist. We here at This Week Explained believe that therapy can be incredibly valuable. Whether you've been in therapy personally or not, the broader benefits are clear. It's so helpful for learning positive coping skills, understanding how to set healthy boundaries, and it really empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's so important to remember that therapy isn't just for those who've experienced combat or major trauma. It's a tool for anyone looking to improve their mental well being and navigate life's challenges. That's why we're thrilled to talk about BetterHelp. With over 5,000 therapists in the UK, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. And it clearly resonates with users, boasting an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars based on over 1.7 million client reviews. It's also incredibly convenient. You can connect with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy schedule. And you can even switch therapists at any time if you feel it's not the right fit. And here's something special for our listeners. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp is offering our listeners 10% off their first month. What are you waiting for? Talk it out with BetterHelp. Once again, our listeners get 10% off their first month by going to betterhelp.com/thisweek. That's BETTERHELP.com/thisweek. Tired of feeling overwhelmed by the headlines? Want to truly understand the why behind the global chaos? Then you are in the right place. Welcome to This Week Explained, your weekly deep dive into the most complex and impactful stories shaping our world. I'm Tiana, and joining me as always is Kervin. Before we jump into the crucial developments of the week, a quick favor. If you want to ensure you never miss an episode, make sure you're following or subscribed on your podcast platform. It literally takes 2 seconds and keeps you instantly updated. And if you are getting value from what we are doing here, a simple rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify helps us reach more curious minds like yours. And don't forget the new interactive comments on Spotify. It's a fantastic way to engage directly with the show and other listeners, extending the conversation beyond the broadcast. You can also find more fantastic podcasts like ours by visiting leonmedianetwork.com, part of the awesome Leon Media Network. This week, we're looking at a world teetering on the brink. It's a moment defined by a dangerous friction between the desire for stability and the forceful projection of power that threatens to unravel it. In Europe, this tension is exploding as Russia launches a massive new assault on Ukraine's entire natural gas infrastructure, running parallel to a complete diplomatic stalemate where U.S. calls for a quick resolution are flatly rejected by Moscow. In Gaza, a fragile ceasefire holds on not by agreement, but by the sheer political willpower of a U.S. administration that refuses to let it fail, even as localized attacks from remnant militant cells threaten to trigger a full-scale collapse. Meanwhile, the U.S. flexes its muscles in the Americas with a massive naval deployment, publicly denying plans for war while drawing up a secret target list for strikes within Venezuela. And in the South China Sea, China attempts to solidify control of the Scarborough Shoal using gray zone tactics, triggering a U.S. response aimed not at Beijing, but at reassuring its nervous ally, the Philippines. Finally, we provide an update on the chaos putting the African continent on the brink of disaster. With Gen Z protesters in the South and a power vacuum in the West, will we see the flames of uprising and terrorism expand to the Western world? It's a world of fragile truces and new provocations. As always, we are going to start with Ukraine because it feels like the entire nature of the war is shifting just as the weather turns. We are seeing reports of a massive Russian escalation against the energy sector. So what is new here? We have seen them target energy before.
Yeah, we have, but this is different in two very significant ways. The first is the sheer size and scale of these attacks, and we're talking about overwhelming aerial assaults. We've got massive drone swarms that are designed to simply overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses. Now, the second, and perhaps more critical point, is the target set. We've spoken about this previously, the focus almost exclusively on the electricity grid. Now, Russia is, for the first time, systematically targeting Ukraine's entire natural gas infrastructure. This includes production facilities, crucial storage sites, and the distribution network.
And of course, this is happening right at the onset of winter. So the timing, as we have come to understand, is not by accident.
Yeah, definitely not by accident. And the objective here appears to be twofold. First, to inflict maximum civilian hardship. You want to leave the country in the dark and in the cold. And that's because Russia wants to break the Ukrainian morale. Well, second, this is a strategic attempt to sever the country of Ukraine. The attacks are heavily concentrated in the east, and they are also targeting the transmission lines that could bring power from the less effective regions, which are in the western part of Ukraine. That is an effort to physically isolate and black out the eastern half of Ukraine.
And on the surface, this sounds very one sided, but that is not the complete picture, is it?
No, no, that's not. This escalation is not happening in a vacuum. It comes directly on the heels of Ukraine's own highly effective drone campaign against Russian oil refineries and those fuel depots. Now, those strikes have had a real impact on Russia's domestic fuel supply, but also the export capabilities in Russia. So, what we are seeing from Russia is, in part, a massive tit for tat retaliation.
Okay, so how does Ukraine even begin to defend themselves against this?
I think that's the critical problem here. Their military request has reportedly shifted, so they're moving from a focus on long range offensive missiles to a desperate plea for a more air defense system, specifically those Patriot batteries we've spoken about before. But even then, as some experts have pointed out, it is incredibly difficult to defend every piece of infrastructure against a simultaneous swarm of hundreds of drones.
It is a truly brutal tactical reality, and it feels so disconnected from the diplomatic narrative that we are hearing, especially out of Washington. The Trump administration has been very clear it wants a quick resolution to this war. So, how do you reconcile that desire with this battlefield escalation?
Yeah, you don't, they're two opposing tracks. And the United States is trying to force a diplomatic breakthrough. We saw this quote carrot approach end quote that happened back in August. Discussions of sanctions relief, economic deals, and that resulted in no agreement. And so now we are seeing the stick. The administration hit Russia's top oil producers with these new sanctions, and that is so the US can force Russia into an immediate ceasefire.
And what was the response from the Kremlin?
Well, unsurprisingly, it was an immediate and flat rejection. President Putin publicly stated that Moscow's negotiating position has not changed. Russia is just not interested in a ceasefire, at least along the current battle lines.
So, why is the US approach not working? If the pressure is that high, why is Russia so unwilling to budge?
I think it's because look, there's really no quick fix here. Um, uh, that's where we have to look at Russia's core objectives. I don't think it's just about gaining territory. So first, for President Putin, this war is a matter of personal historical legacy. He went on Tucker Carlson and spoke for 30 minutes just on the historical legacy. Second, he has invested an enormous amount of resources and, frankly, human life, hundreds of thousands of casualties, and he has had to justify that immense cost to his own population. So, in this case, he cannot be seen to have failed.
You said that it's not just about territory, so what else is on the table?
Yeah, I think this is the real impasse here. So, Russia's core demands are very strategic. They want guarantees of Ukraine's neutrality. That means no NATO membership. But just as importantly, they want to dictate the future size and capabilities of Ukraine's military. That would severely limit Ukraine's army and its missile ranges.
Which for Kyiv would mean it has no way to deter future aggression from Russia.
Yeah, you're exactly right there. That's a non-starter for Ukraine. And they've been duped before by Russia. So while some reports suggest there might be the smallest amount of wiggle room on certain territorial claims, there has been zero movement from Moscow on these core security and military demands.
It sounds like a complete stalemate. The US wants a fast resolution, Russia has deep seated strategic demands, and Ukraine is fighting for its long term survival. So, we have this brutal tactical escalation in the energy war running parallel to an intractable diplomatic stalemate. It is a dynamic that is clearly defining the conflict right now. This seems like a perfect transition. We all saw the headlines. A major escalation in Gaza. An Israeli soldier killed in Rafah, followed by the deadliest Israeli strike since the ceasefire began. Reports of over 100 people were killed, including many children. By any reasonable definition, one would conclude that the ceasefire had collapsed.
Yeah, you would, and had all the markings of a return to full scale conflict. Yet, by Wednesday morning, what were we hearing out of Gaza? Both Hamas and Israel, as well as the Trump administration and the White House, announced they were, once again, committed to the ceasefire deal.
I mean, this is all very jarring back and forth in this age of instantaneous nude broadcasting through social media and 24/7 news broadcasts. You use the phrase, two things can be true at the same time. So, how can a ceasefire sustain that level of violence and still be called a ceasefire?
Yeah, you beat me to the punch there, at my own phrase. That's exactly what I was going to say. But we're not talking about a traditional truce. And historically, especially in the Middle East, this is what happens, these tit for tat attacks. This is why it's so important to not react instantly to the initial reporting. The ceasefire is going to continue, and it's going to continue in this state of limbo. That is until the next full scale conflict happens. This deal is proving to be both incredibly fragile, but paradoxically durable.
Durable? That seems like the last
Mm.
word that I would use to describe it.
Yeah, well, I guess there probably is a better word, but it is durable in the sense that the United States is holding it together through sheer political willpower. This is not a deal that was born from mutual agreement. It was, in large part, imposed by Washington. President Trump and his senior staff have invested an immense amount of political capital in this agreement. They simply will not let it fail.
So, what are we seeing then? When Israel responds with such force, is the US giving a green light?
I think we're seeing a very delicate two-level game here. So publicly, the White House defends Israel's right to respond to an attack, especially on a soldier who also held US citizenship, but privately. It is very clear that the United States and US officials are the ones acting as the brake in this situation. After a similar, smaller escalation last month, it was U.S. pressure that reopened border crossings for aid and prevented an even harsher Israeli response. They are allowing Israel some leeway to respond to violations, but they're absolutely not going to let Prime Minister Netanyahu resume full scale conflict in Gaza. That's despite pressure from some in Netanyahu's own cabinet.
All right, so let's talk about those violations. The report said Hamas fighters killed the soldier, but Hamas leadership denied involvement and immediately accused Israel of a quote, blatant violation, end quote. So, why would Hamas risk the entire deal?
Yeah, I think this is one of the more critical parts to understand, and it's the inherent fragility of the situation on the ground. Now, the deal is stuck between its first and second phases. Phase one, the exchange of living hostages for Palestinian prisoners, that's mostly complete, but Israeli forces still occupy more than half of Gaza. In that territory, there are isolated Hamas cells trapped in tunnels. They're cut off from the main command and control structure. They have limited leadership, um, and they have limited resources, limited to no communication, and they are essentially ticking time bombs. Now, the actual Hamas leadership may not even know where all of these fighters are. These isolated militants facing starvation or capture have a high incentive to emerge and fight. They would rather die in combat than wait to be found.
So, this deadly incident in Rafah was likely not an order from Hamas leadership, but a catastrophe in the making, as one expert put it.
Yeah, I think so. It's very predictable. This is a predictable, localized breakdown that, because of the U.S. involvement, does not lead to total strategic collapse. So we're seeing a pattern here: a local attack by a remnant group, a massive and disproportionate Israeli retaliation, international condemnation, and then this quiet U.S. brokered return to the status quo.
Well, this all sounds unsustainable. A truce without peace defined by periodic escalations.
And it's entirely unsustainable in the long term. But in the short term, it does serve the goals of all the major players, even if it serves that imperfectly.
How so?
Look, Hamas, though depleted, gets a hudna, a truce, the time to rebuild and recuperate. They accept this deal as the least bad option. Now, for Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu is wary of resuming a total war, especially with an election year approaching. And this state of managing the conflict is preferable to that all out invasion. Now, for the White House, the deal holding in this sense, even just on paper, is a critical foreign policy objective.
So we're just left in this dangerous limbo. The fighting is largely stopped, but there is no path forward to the next phase.
Yeah, look, that next phase is the real barrier here. Phase two requires solving the impossible issues: the complete disarmament of Hamas, the deployment of an international security force, and deciding who will ultimately govern Gaza. Qatar's prime minister said Hamas is willing to cede power, but there is a massive gap between that and total disarmament. That means any prospect of actual peace or even just rebuilding Gaza is as remote as ever. Now, this ceasefire is really just a placeholder. It's held together by intense U.S. pressure that will be perpetually tested by the facts on the ground.
This dynamic of a major power trying to enforce a deal that the facts on the ground constantly threaten to undermine is actually a very good transition point. But first, we need to take a short break. When we return, we'll shift our focus from the fragile ceasefire in Gaza to the Western Hemisphere. So stay with us. We'll be right back. This episode of This Week Explain is brought to you by the good folks over at Fresh Roasted Coffee and Positively Tea. Okay, so let me tell you, I've been loving their coffee lately. They have this super fun coffee quiz on their website that helps you find the perfect blend. I took it, and it matched me with this smooth medium roast that's just so good. And if you're more of a tea person, don't worry. They've got you covered with Positively Tea. They've got everything: organic, fair trade, single origin, you name it, they have it. Seriously, whether you're a coffee or tea drinker, you're going to find something you love. So, listeners, head over to the link in our show notes, click it, and it'll take you to a special offer on the coffee and tea. And when you get to checkout, use the promo code this week to get 20% off your first purchase. Welcome back, listeners. As we said before the break, we are shifting our focus to the Western Hemisphere, specifically to the escalating situation in the Caribbean around Venezuela. So, Kervin, there has been an immense amount of noise coming from this region. We see reports of a massive U.S. naval deployment, but at the same time, we have the White House saying no military action is being considered. So, feels contradictory.
Yeah, it feels that way because it kind of is, right? It's the typical contradictory messaging from the Trump administration. And That's often by design. What we're observing is a classic case of public diplomacy versus military posture. So, on one hand, President Trump has explicitly told reporters, look, he's not considering strikes within Venezuela. His Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he also publicly dismissed reports of an imminent attack. He called them fake.
But the posture, as you call it, does not match the words coming out of their mouths. We're
Yeah.
talking about the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, moving toward the coast alongside thousands of troops, fighter jets, and warships. That is not a small deployment.
Yeah, it's definitely not. This is a significant concentration of military assets. And while the administration denies plans for internal strikes, it is already engaged in lethal force near Venezuela.
You are obviously referring to the strikes on the alleged drug smuggling vessels that we've covered for the last month or so.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And since September, the U.S. military has conducted over a dozen strikes on small boats and even semi submersibles. And that happened in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. Now, these strikes have resulted in at least 62 deaths. The administration claims these were anti drug operations, but it has yet to present any public evidence substantiating those claims.
This is all happening in the sea around Venezuela, but now we are hearing reports that the planning has moved beyond just the water because there is now talk of a secret list.
Yeah, a secret list. And now, first, let me start by speaking directly to any journalist or media member who may be listening in to this podcast. Can we please stop using words like secret list, kill list? Every targeting list is classified, at least to the secret level, if not higher than that. There's nothing new here. I'd be more interested to read a report that cited an unclassified strike list. So please do better. Now, the White House does deny imminent action, but we also know a classified target list inside Venezuela has been drawn up and briefed to some Senate Republicans. This suggests that while an attack may not happen tomorrow, the groundwork and targeting packets, they're all being prepared. Which, let me give some insight here. This is the normal process, even if the U.S. military never strikes a single one of those targets.
Okay, but what kind of targets are on this list?
Well, from what I can gather, there are reportedly sites run by the Maduro government that are also allegedly used by the cartels. So we're talking about ports, airports, other key infrastructure.
So, what are the actual options on the table? We're not talking about a full scale land invasion, are we?
I think most analysts, myself included, agree that a full scale invasion is the least likely and frankly the most dangerous scenario here. The risk is simply too high. Experts who have worked operations in Panama. I have not done that, so I'll lean on their knowledge. They've noted that underestimating the Venezuelan people's resistance to an outside intervention, even one supposedly liberating them, would be a major error.
So, limited strikes.
I think that appears to be the most probable option here. Should the president even decide to act within Venezuela? The likely targets would be narcotics related sites first, then perhaps supporting infrastructure like fuel centers or cell towers, and then eventually Venezuela's air defense sites. Now, the most difficult decisions, of course, would be whether to authorize a decapitation strike against Maduro himself.
Nicolas Maduro must be seeing this. I mean, he sees the carrier group, he hears the rhetoric, he knows his coast is being buzzed by special operations helicopters. He can't be sitting idle.
Yeah, and like he's far from idle right now. He's publicly accusing the U.S. of, I want to quote him here, fabricating a new eternal war, end quote. But behind the scenes, he's actively soliciting military aid from his allies. According to internal documents, Maduro sent personal letters to both President Putin in Russia and President Xi in China.
And what is he asking them for?
That's all about defense and situational awareness. He's asking China for expanded military cooperation and, crucially, to expedite the production of radar detection systems. Now, he's also reached out to Iran, and from Iran, his transport minister has reportedly been coordinating shipments of GPS scramblers, long range drones, and passive detection equipment. And so, right now, he is just trying to counter the U.S. technological advantage.
Which brings us to Russia, of course. That's his primary lifeline, right?
Absolutely. And in a letter to Putin, Maduro specifically requests help overhauling his existing and failing air defenses. He needs repairs for his Russian made fighter jets and his Russian made radars. He's even asked for a 3-year financing plan for this support.
The state of his military must be a serious concern for him.
Yeah, it really is. And analysts and even former Venezuelan military officials have stated that much of the equipment purchased years ago from Russia is now outdated. It's non operational, or it was just pure junk in the first place. So Maduro is in a very difficult defensive position.
So that begs the question, will Russia help him?
Yeah, and I think this is the most complex piece of the puzzle. Russia has deep interests in Venezuela, billions in oil and gas rights. There's also plans of a new Kalashnikov munitions factory. They just ratified a new strategic treaty, but Russia's also deeply mired in its own expensive war in Ukraine.
So its resources are stretched.
Extremely. Moscow's official response to the U.S. buildup has been very restrained. They have expressed serious concern, but some analysts note they are spending very little actual political capital to defend Maduro right now. They simply may not have the capacity for a major intervention across the Atlantic.
So does this situation benefit Russia in any way?
I think it absolutely does. This is an unexpected strategic gift for the Kremlin. Every U.S. carrier group, every fighter squadron, every analyst that's focused on the Caribbean, that's one less asset focused on Europe and Ukraine. This U.S. pressure campaign divides Washington's attention, and that is a significant win for Putin.
So to summarize this whole picture, we have the U.S. conducting lethal military operations at sea while simultaneously denying plans for a wider war, even as it draws up a target list, for one. And this pressure is pushing Venezuela to formally request military aid from China, Iran, and Russia. And all of this military focus on the Caribbean may be inadvertently helping Russia achieve its strategic goals in Europe. And that theme of regional escalation and unintended consequences is something we are also seeing develop in the South China Sea, which is where we will turn our attention next. So, Kervin, we are seeing headlines about Chinese military drills, U.S. show of force plans, a new nature reserve. It is a very crowded and very tense patch of water. So, can you set the stage for us? What is actually happening at the Scarborough Shoal?
It's a convergence of several different escalations, to be honest. Now, the simplest way to look at it is that China is making a very strong, very assertive push to solidify its control over the shoal. And for the first time in a while, the U.S. is signaling it is willing to push back with credible, non diplomatic options.
Okay, so let us start with China's moves. The one that catches my eye is the nature reserve. On its face, that sounds environmental, almost benign.
Yeah, it's an incredibly effective piece of, quote, lawfare, end quote. Something that I would often refer to as a gray zone tactic. It's not about ecology, it's about establishing administration.
How so?
Well, by declaring it a nature reserve, Beijing gives itself a domestic, legal pretext to enforce this area. This allows their Coast Guard to legally, under Chinese law, block or even detain Philippine fishing vessels from an area they have fished for centuries. So it's a way to claim sovereignty without actually firing a shot. That's a classic salami slicing tactic. You take control one small, seemingly administrative slice at a time.
And this tactic is being backed up by more conventional force. We have seen reports of Chinese warships, bombers, and their own military exercises.
Yeah, the nature reserve is the legal justification. The military drills and the aggressive Chinese Coast Guard patrols, that is the enforcement. They're signaling that the reserve is not just a press release. Well, we have seen repeated dangerous maneuvers, ramming incidents, water cannons. This is a clear escalation from simple patrols to active physical harassment.
Which brings us to the American response. Reports have emerged that U.S. Indo Pacific Command has an execute order to prepare a show of force, possibly using HIMARS rocket systems. That sounds pretty significant.
Yeah, it is, but we have to be very precise about what it likely means. The same sources that confirm the order also noted that Indo-PACOM is unlikely to execute this order.
So it's a bluff?
Not a bluff, it's a signal. In this arena, the leak of a credible, prepared operation is the actual operation here. It's peace through strength. So firing a HIMARS rocket is one way to send a message. Having your adversary read in the news that you have a plan, an order, and a political will to fire that rocket that achieves much of the same goal with far less risk.
So, who is the signal for? There is a major presidential meeting between Trump and Xi scheduled. Is this just diplomatic posturing to give President Trump leverage at the negotiating table?
But that's certainly a secondary benefit. Now, the timing, not a coincidence, but the primary audience for this signal is actually not Beijing. It, and it's not just for this Trump G summit. The primary audience is the Philippines. It's a U.S. treaty ally. They're watching their sovereign territory, or at least their exclusive economic zone, be encroached upon. Their fishermen are being harassed and their ships are being rammed. They are looking to Washington, D.C., and they are asking, is the Mutual Defense Treaty just a piece of paper?
So, this is all about alliance credibility.
That is the entire ballgame here. So the U.S. does nothing while China absorbs the shoal. U.S. credibility as an ally in the entire Indo Pacific collapses. Why would Japan, why would South Korea, Australia, New Zealand trust U.S. commitments? So, this show of force plan, combined with other recent moves like the creation of a new task force Philippines and joint naval drills with Australia and New Zealand, this is all intended to do two things. They want to deter China from taking an irreversible step and also reassure the Philippines that the U.S. is a legitimate, reliable partner.
It still feels like a very dangerous situation. You have US allied drills and Chinese drills happening in the same area at the same time. We're talking about warships and jets, not just the Coast Guard.
We are, and the greatest risk here is not a pre planned war. Neither side wants a pre planned war. It's the risk, of miscalculation. It's the danger is a local PLAN or Chinese Coast Guard commander who gets a little too aggressive, much of an aggressive maneuver, a dangerous maneuver, a ramming that goes wrong, a water cannon that injures a sailor, an incident that escalates lethally before diplomats can get on the phone. That is the flashpoint everyone is watching for.
So, looking ahead, what are the indicators you'll be watching for to see if this US signal was received?
Well, first, I want to see what happens to the floating barrier China's reportedly installed at the shoal's entrance. Does it quietly disappear after the summit? Also, does China actually try to enforce its nature reserve by arresting fishermen? That's going to be a major escalation. And I think the biggest red line that we need to look for is, do we see any Chinese dredgers or construction vessels? That would signal an intent to build a permanent military base. And that's the line the U.S. has signaled it will not accept.
It is an incredible case study of 21st century power dynamics. You have lawfare, military signaling, and alliance politics all colliding in one small patch of the ocean. And it is a test of whether gray zone tactics can be successfully deterred by conventional military posturing. That theme of hybrid tactics versus conventional power actually provides a perfect bridge into our next topic. We have been discussing the acute crises unfolding in Mali and Tanzania, and they really are powerful illustrations of a much larger, more systemic trend that we are tracking across the continent, particularly in the Western Sahel. So, Carvin, we are witnessing a fundamental geopolitical realignment. Over the last few years, Western nations, including France and the United States, have been pressured to withdraw from several countries. So, can you remind our audience what is driving this seismic shift on the continent of Africa?
Look, it's being driven by a very effective and potent information campaign. So there's this powerful narrative, amplified both online and by these new state actors on the continent, that centers on anti colonialism and resource theft. That successfully paints any Western presence as inherently exploitative. It's a simple continuation of that colonial past.
And this message is clearly finding fertile ground.
Yeah, it is. It resonates with a populace that has not seen its quality of life improve, and it's also a very useful tool for new military governments seeking to consolidate their own power and legitimize their rule by rejecting those old partners.
So, as these Western nations leave, we saw the high profile withdrawal of the U.S. from its counterterrorism bases in Niger, for example. Who or perhaps what is filling that security and influence vacuum?
Yeah, and like that's a critical question here because a vacuum is never left empty for too long. And we're seeing global South powers, chiefly Russia and China, step right on in. But look, they are arriving with very different mandates and methods. Now, China's focus tends to be more economic and infrastructural. Russia's engagement is heavily focused on security, but this has led to a fascinating and dangerous new dynamic. The very same terrorist organizations that the United States and French forces were trying to weed out are now in a direct power struggle with new Russian backed forces.
I'm pretty sure we saw that coming from
Oh,
the
yeah.
jump. I'm pretty sure. So, the fight is the same, just the combatants have changed.
Yeah, in some ways, yes, very true. But the original counterterrorism framework, which the media often highlighted with terms like drone bases, that's gone. Has been replaced by more direct and perhaps more volatile confrontation. The result is that this exchange of partners has not brought the promised stability that China and Russia said it would. The evidence points to it having introduced more instability to an already fragile region.
Hmm. Hmm. And this is all happening on top of severe internal political issues.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to couple this massive geopolitical realignment with the domestic trend of fabricated elections. This is where the old guard clings to power at all costs. This is what we are seeing in places like Tanzania. It creates an incredible pressure cooker.
And America.
And yeah, in America. Very, very true.
It seems that the continent is being pulled apart by both these huge external power struggles and these intense internal power grabs. And the most significant and often overlooked part of this entire story is the impact on the local population. The narrative was that removing the colonizers would lead to sovereignty and prosperity, but that is not what is happening on the ground.
No, it's not. And for the average person just struggling to make ends meet, the grand geopolitical game, the shift from one external partner to another, combined with their own leaders refusing to yield power, this has only made life more difficult and, quite honestly, more dangerous.
The economic siege in Mali is a perfect, heartbreaking example. The public is caught between an armed group and a military government, all while these larger international plates are shifting. It's a complex yet sobering picture, and one we will continue to follow. So stick with us each week as we continue to try to make sense of this crazy world. As we close out, Carvin, is there anything else that you would like to discuss?
Nope. This is coming out late. We understand that. It is also late where I am, so I'm ready to go to sleep.
Yeah, sorry about that. We had something pop up yesterday that required Kervin's immediate attention. Therefore, we didn't get to record when we usually do. Fun times.
Yes.
But thank you
Fun.
for sticking with us and being patient. Thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope that you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear from you. For more in depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.